I'm going to tell you about something that happened on Varatka. And I know how this sounds. I know because I was there, standing behind 3 inches of observation glass with my coffee getting cold in my hand, and I still didn't believe what I was watching. None of us did. My name is Torvund. I'm a Galician, tall, gray-skinned, 4-fingered, nothing special. I've worked as a xenobiological field monitor for the Galactic Conservation Authority for 19 years. 19 years of cataloging predator territories, tracking migration routes, filing reports that nobody reads. That's what I do. That's all I've ever done. But I need to tell you about Marin Callaway. Because the galaxy got it wrong about her. About all of them, really. About every single human we ever looked at and thought we understood. We didn't understand anything. Varatka is one of those planets that the GCA classifies as a Tier 1 exclusion zone. That means nobody goes there. Nobody builds there. Nobody even orbits too close without filing 17 forms and getting approval from 3 separate committees. And the reason for all that bureaucracy, the reason for all that caution, comes down to one animal. The Shrike Matron. Now, you've probably heard the name. It gets tossed around in documentaries and late-night science feeds. People talk about the Shrike Matron the way they talk about black holes or gamma bursts, with this detached, almost academic kind of awe. They say things like apex predator and evolutionary perfection, and they nod their heads like they really get it. They don't get it. I've seen a Shrike Matron up close. I've seen one move. And what I can tell you is that no documentary, no holographic simulation, no amount of academic jargon prepares you for the actual experience of watching that thing exist in real space, right in front of you, close enough to touch if there wasn't a wall between you. Picture something between a mantis and a wolf. Now make it 9 feet tall at the shoulder. Give it 6 limbs, 4 for running, 2 for killing. Cover it in this chitinous plating that's darker than carbon fiber, with edges that catch the light like broken glass. The head is elongated, almost serpentine, with a jaw structure that splits 4 ways when it opens. No eyes that you can see. It navigates by thermal mapping and subsonic vibration. It can feel your heartbeat from 200 meters away. The claws are what stay with you, though. Each forelimb ends in these curved, serrated appendages, 3 of them overlapping like surgical blades. The GCA tested a dead specimen once. Those claws scored through ship-grade titanium plating. Not scratched, scored. Clean furrows an inch deep. The Shrike Matron is not the biggest predator in the galaxy. It's not the fastest. It's not even the most venomous or the most aggressive. But it is, by every measurable metric, the most lethal. Because it's all of those things at once, combined with a predatory intelligence that borders on tactical reasoning. It hunts in patterns. It adapts. It learns from failed strikes and doesn't repeat the same approach twice. The GCA has documented Shrike Matron setting ambushes, using terrain features as funneling corridors, even driving prey toward natural hazards. One researcher described it as encountering a weapons platform that evolved legs. In 300 years of galactic record-keeping, no sapient species has ever survived a direct engagement with a Shrike Matron. Calith soldiers, 8 feet tall, armored like walking tanks, they last about 12 seconds. Varathi pack hunters, who fight in coordinated groups of 6, average maybe 20 seconds. A fully armed Dranaki war squad once tried to take one down on a sanctioned cull mission. All 9 of them died in under a minute. The mission footage is still used as a training example at military academies. The message was simple. You don't fight a Shrike Matron. You don't challenge one. You don't even put yourself in a position where fighting might become necessary. You run or you die. That's the math. That's always been the math. Until Marin Callaway went and broke it. She arrived on Varatka 6 months before the incident, came in on a conservation shuttle with a group of 8, mostly Galicians like me, a couple of Drenaki techs and her. The only human. I remember thinking she looked wrong for this kind of work. Not in a cruel way, I'm not one of those species purists who think humans are defective. But there's a physical reality to field monitoring on exclusion worlds. It's hard terrain, dangerous atmosphere, long treks in heavy gear. And Marin was small. I mean genuinely small, even by human standards. 5'3", maybe 115 pounds soaking wet. She had this narrow build, thin wrists, the kind of frame that made you instinctively want to carry things for her. Brown hair cut short and practical. A face that looked younger than her 31 years, and these pale green eyes that were always watching everything with this quiet, unreadable intensity. She didn't talk much those first few weeks. The other team members, particularly Josic, our Calith security chief, weren't exactly subtle about their opinions. Josic was the kind of guy who measured everyone by how much weight they could deadlift, and by that metric, Marin was essentially furniture. They sent us a human for field work on Varatka, Josic said during our first team briefing, not even trying to lower his voice. A female human, on the planet with the most dangerous predator in charted space. Someone at headquarters is either stupid or trying to kill her. Marin was sitting 4 seats away. She heard every word. Her expression didn't change at all. She just looked at Josic for a moment, this flat, measuring look, and then went back to reviewing her data tablet. That should have been the first clue. Nobody who's actually weak reacts to mockery like that. Anger, I understand. Hurt, sure. Even false bravado. But that calm, that complete lack of emotional reaction, that's something else entirely. That's someone who's heard it all before and stopped caring a long time ago. But I didn't pick up on it. None of us did. We just saw small and quiet and human and filled in the rest ourselves. She did her job without complaint, woke up before everyone else, ran the perimeter checks that nobody wanted to do, calibrated sensors in the rain, filed her reports on time every time with a level of detail that actually put the rest of us to shame. She ate alone most nights, reading research papers on her tablet, occasionally making notes in a battered physical notebook, actual paper, which I'd never seen a human use before. About a month in, I found her in the observation lab at 3 in the morning, watching recorded footage of a Shrike Matron hunting. She had the playback slowed to 1/8 speed, and she was leaning forward in her chair, eyes locked on the screen, scribbling in that notebook of hers. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She didn't look up. "I'm studying." "Studying what?" "Her movement patterns, the way she shifts weight before a lateral strike. There's a tell. The second left forelimb drops about 2 inches before she commits to the lunge. Every time. She can't help it. It's structural." I looked at the screen. I'd watched dozens of hours of Shrike footage in my career. I'd never noticed any tell. I leaned closer and Marin reached over and tapped the replay. The matron coiled, and just before it lunged, there it was. The second left forelimb, dipping slightly, redistributing weight. "How did you see that?" I asked. She shrugged. "I watched it enough times." "Why?" She finally looked at me, those green eyes, steady and unblinking, because knowing how something moves is the same as knowing how to survive it. Then she went back to her notebook, and I stood there feeling like I'd just glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see. Something beneath the surface that was larger and more deliberate than anything her small frame suggested. The months passed. The research season cycled through its rhythms. We tracked Shrike territories, cataloged juvenile growth rates, mapped nesting sites from safe distances. Standard work. Routine. Marin kept studying. Every night, every free hour. She didn't just watch the footage, she cross-referenced it with biomechanical analyses, environmental data, atmospheric pressure readings. She ran calculations I didn't understand, filling page after page of that notebook with diagrams and formulas, and these weird little sketches that looked like dance choreography. I asked her about it once. She said, "If you understand the physics of how a body moves, you can predict what it's going to do before it does it. Everything that has mass operates within rules, even a Shrike Matron." Jacek overheard that one. He laughed hard enough that his translator almost glitched. "The human thinks she can predict a Shrike," he told the mess hall. 9 Dranaki commandos couldn't survive one, but the little human with her paper book is going to figure it out. A few people laughed. Most just shook their heads. Marin ate her meal, cleaned her tray, and went back to the observation lab. I started watching her more carefully after that. Not because I believed she was onto something, I'll be honest about that, but because something about her focus unsettled me. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't fear. It was something methodical and patient and deeply, disturbingly calm. She started going outside the base compound alone, short trips at first, just to the sensor perimeter and back, then longer ones. She'd take a pack, a handheld scanner, and nothing else. No weapon, no armor, just her walking the red dust trails of Varatka like she was strolling through a park. "She's going to get herself killed," Jacek said flatly. I couldn't argue with him. The exclusion zone perimeter was set at 8 kilometers from the nearest known Shrike territory. Marin was walking to within 4, then 3, then 2. When I confronted her about it, she showed me her scanner readings. She'd been mapping subsonic vibration patterns, the acoustic signatures that Shrike matrons use to navigate and communicate. She'd built a personal database of over 300 unique signatures, tagged by time, location, and behavioral context. "I know where they are," she said simply. "Every moment I'm out there, I know exactly where every matron within scanning range is, what she's doing, and which direction she's moving. I'm never in danger." "You're within striking distance of the most dangerous predator in." "I'm within scanning range. That's different." She held up the device. "This gives me a 15-minute advance warning window. A Shrike matron can cover 2 kilometers in 90 seconds at full sprint. That means at my current maximum approach distance, I have over 13 minutes of margin. I could crawl back to base on my hands and knees and still make it." The math checked out. I hated that the math checked out. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesday was data consolidation day, and I was behind on my reports, and I was annoyed about it in the small, petty way that you get annoyed about paperwork when you don't know that something extraordinary is about to happen. The weather was bad. Varatka has these cyclical dust storms that roll through the lowlands every few weeks. Not dangerous exactly, but they reduce visibility to almost nothing and they play havoc with electronic equipment. The protocol during dust events is simple. Stay inside, run diagnostics, wait it out. Marin was outside. She'd left before dawn, before the storm warnings updated. By the time we realized she was gone and tried to raise her on comms, the atmospheric interference was already too heavy for a clean signal. We got fragments, broken words, static, her voice cutting in and out like a bad radio. "Fine, monitoring Northeast Ridge, heading back in." Then nothing. Jacek wanted to send a search team. I agreed with him for once. But our station chief, a methodical old Galician named Bevra, overruled us. "Visibility is under 10 meters. The scanner grid is down. If we send people out, we're adding more bodies to the problem without solving it. She has her personal scanner. She knows the terrain. We wait." So we waited. 2 hours, 3. The storm kept rolling, the comm stayed dead. And then, around midday, something happened that changed everything. The seismic monitors, the deep ground sensors that we used to track large fauna movement, went haywire. Not the scattered, irregular readings you get from a storm. These were rhythmic, purposeful. Something massive was moving fast through the lowland basin, heading northeast, toward the ridge where Marin had last reported. Bevra pulled up the signature analysis, and the room got very, very quiet. Shrike Matron, adult female, based on the seismic displacement, one of the largest ever recorded. "Get her on comms," Bevra said, and for the first time in 19 years I heard fear in her voice. We tried everything: boosted signal, emergency frequency, even the old analog backup system that nobody had used since the station was built. Nothing got through. The storm was a wall of electromagnetic noise. Josic stood up. "I'm going out there." "You'll die," Bevra said. "She'll die if I don't." "You'll both die." A Shrike Matron in active pursuit, in zero visibility with no scanner support. You won't even see it before. Then what? We sit here. We just sit here and listen to the seismic feed and wait for the readings to stop and then go collect what's left of her. Nobody had an answer for that. The seismic readings converged. The matron's signature and Marin's estimated position overlapped, and on the deep ground sensors, we watched something we'd never seen before. The readings didn't stop. They didn't end in the abrupt flatline that indicated a successful kill. Instead, they became chaotic, wildly irregular, oscillating between extremes, patterns that none of our models could parse. "What the hell is happening out there?" somebody whispered. The storm broke around 14:30. Not gradually, it just stopped, the way storms on Varatka do, like somebody threw a switch. One minute the world was red dust and screaming wind, and the next minute there was pale amber sunlight streaming through the observation windows and a sky so clear it hurt to look at. I was the first one to the external cameras. I pulled up the northeast ridge feed, adjusted the zoom, and for about 5 seconds I genuinely thought the equipment was malfunctioning, because what I was seeing didn't make sense. There was a Shrike Matron on the ridge, lying on its side, not moving. And next to it, sitting on a rock, drinking from a water canister, was Marin Callaway. She was covered in dust. Her jacket was torn. There was something dark on her left arm, blood, I realized later, though from that distance I couldn't tell if it was hers. She was sitting there with her legs dangling off the rock, casual as anything, like she'd just finished a long walk and needed a rest. The Shrike Matron was dead. I need you to understand how impossible that was. I need you to really sit with it for a moment. 115-pound human woman, alone, with no weapon, no armor, no backup, in zero visibility conditions, had killed an adult Shrike Matron. The apex predator that had a perfect kill record against every sapient species in the galaxy. The thing that murdered 9 armed Dranaki commandos in 53 seconds. Marin Callaway beat it with a field knife and a plan. When we reached her, running, all of us, even Bevra, who hadn't run anywhere in a decade, she was remarkably calm. Tired, clearly. Her left forearm had a deep gash that would need surgical attention. Her hands were shaking in that fine, involuntary way that follows extreme adrenaline dump. But her eyes were steady, and her voice was even, and when Josic grabbed her shoulders and shouted, "What happened?" she just looked up at him and said, "She found me in the storm, so I killed her." Like it was that simple, like it was just the obvious thing to do. It took us 3 days to reconstruct the full sequence of events. Partly from Marin's account, partly from her scanner logs, which, miraculously, had maintained local recording even when comms went down, and partly from the forensic analysis of the matron's body. Here's what happened. Marin was on the northeast ridge conducting a routine vibration survey when the storm hit faster than the forecasts predicted. She began heading back immediately, but within minutes, visibility dropped to near zero. Her scanner was still functional on local mode, and she was navigating by saved waypoints when the device picked up a Shrike signature at range, roughly 3 kilometers, closing fast. The matron was hunting. The storm, which blinded most species, was irrelevant to a Shrike. They navigate by thermal mapping and subsonic vibration. In fact, storms were ideal hunting conditions. The atmospheric disruption masked the matron's approach vibrations until it was much closer than normal. The prey in this case, Marin, would have significantly less warning. But Marin had her personal scanner, and she'd spent months learning to read Shrike signatures the way some people read sheet music. She knew this animal was coming before it expected her to know. She had options. She could run for the base, but the math didn't work. The matron was too close, moving too fast, and the terrain between the ridge and the compound was open ground. A Shrike matron could outrun any bipedal species on flat terrain. Running meant dying tired. She could climb. Shrike matrons were poor vertical climbers. Their mass-to-grip ratio made sheer surfaces difficult. But the ridge formations were sloped, not sheer. The matron could follow. She could hide. Shrikes navigated by thermal mapping and vibration. In a dust storm with the ground temperature elevated and uniform, thermal detection was degraded. If she could minimize her vibration signature, stop moving, slow her breathing, press herself flat against a rock surface that matched ambient temperature, she might avoid detection. But Marin didn't choose any of those options. Marin chose to fight. And here's the part that still keeps me awake at night. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't a last resort. She told us later, looking right at us, no drama, no false modesty, that she'd been preparing for this possibility since her second week on Varatka. Every hour of footage study, every biomechanical calculation, every solo trek into the field had been building toward this. I needed to understand how she moved, Marin said. I needed to know every structural limitation, every mechanical constraint, every transition gap in her attack sequence. And I needed to internalize it so deeply that I didn't have to think about it. Because when it happened, there wouldn't be time to think. She'd identified 17 distinct attack patterns in the Shrike matron's repertoire. She'd mapped the kinetic chain of each one, which muscles fired, which joints loaded, where the center of mass shifted. And she'd found gaps, not many, not large ones, but they were there. Every predator has a recovery window between strikes, a fraction of a second where momentum has been committed and the body is resetting for the next action. In most Shrike attack patterns, this window was between 0.2 and 0.4 of a second, too fast for most species to exploit. But Marin had drilled herself on reaction timing until she could read the tell, that 2-inch drop of the second left forelimb, and begin her response before the strike was even fully launched. She chose her ground carefully. Even while the storm raged and the matron closed in, she moved with purpose to a specific spot on the ridge that she'd surveyed weeks earlier. A narrow passage between two rock formations, about 4 meters wide. Wide enough for the matron to enter, but narrow enough to limit its lateral movement options. The rock walls would negate the sweeping claw strikes that the Shrike used to catch evading prey. In that corridor, the matron could only come straight at her. She turned off her scanner, pocketed it, drew her field knife, a standard-issue GCA utility blade 20 centimeters long, not a weapon, a tool, the kind of thing you used to cut sample bags and scrape mineral deposits. Then she waited in the dark red dust, blind, feeling the vibrations through the soles of her boots. The matron came from the northeast. Marin felt it in the ground, the rhythmic percussion of 6 limbs at full stride, a pattern she'd memorized until she could reproduce it by tapping her fingers on a table. The vibration told her speed, direction, distance. She counted the intervals between footfalls and calculated closing velocity in her head. At approximately 40 meters, the matron detected Marin's thermal signature through the dust. At that range, in those conditions, the resolution would have been imprecise, a warm smear against a warm background. The matron adjusted course and accelerated. Marin stepped to the left side of the corridor, pressed her back against the rock wall and controlled her breathing. In through the nose, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. Her heart rate was elevated. She told us later it was probably around 140, but her body was still, controlled. every muscle loaded and ready but not tense. Tension slows reaction time. She needed to be loose. The matron entered the corridor at speed. In the dust-choked air, with visibility under 3 meters, neither of them could see the other. But the matron could feel Marin's heartbeat, and Marin could feel the matron's footsteps. It struck. The standard opening attack of a Shrike Matron in a confined space is a straight thrust with the primary right forelimb, a stabbing motion aimed at center mass. It's fast, obscenely fast. The GCA's high-speed cameras clock it at roughly 11 meters per second. For comparison, a human blink takes about 0.3 of a second. The strike covers its full extension in less than that. Marin moved before the strike launched. She read the tell through vibration alone, the subtle shift in ground pressure as the second left forelimb dipped and the matron's weight transferred forward. And she dropped. Not sideways, not backward, down, flat to the ground below the strike plane, so fast and so committed that the matron's claw passed through the space where her torso had been a quarter second earlier. And in the recovery window, those 0.3 of a second where the matron's primary limb was fully extended and the body was resetting, Marin surged upward and forward, inside the matron's reach, and drove her field knife into the ventral joint where the primary right forelimb connected to the thorax. She knew the anatomy. She'd studied it for months. The ventral joint was the only point on a Shrike Matron's body where the chitinous plating didn't overlap. It was a structural necessity. The joint needed range of motion, which meant there was a gap in the armor roughly 6 centimeters wide. Underneath was soft tissue, vascular bundles, and the primary nerve trunk that controlled the entire right forelimb. She hit it clean. The knife went into the hilt. The matron screamed, a sound that I cannot adequately describe except to say that when we recovered Marin's scanner audio later and played it back, 2 of our team members left the room. It was not a sound that belonged in any world where things made sense. The primary right forelimb spasmed and went slack. The matron pivoted, bringing its secondary limbs around in a lateral sweep that caught Marin across the left forearm and opened a gash to the bone. She was thrown sideways, hit the rock wall, lost the knife. She told us later that the pain didn't fully register. Adrenaline shock, whatever you want to call it. She said she felt the impact and the wetness and knew abstractly that she was injured, but it was like reading about someone else's wound in a report. Distant, clinical. The matron was hurt and disoriented. The loss of the primary right forelimb disrupted its balance. The entire attack architecture of the Shrike species is built around bilateral symmetry, and removing one primary limb was like knocking out half the operating system. It could still kill her, easily. But its most practiced attack patterns were compromised. It would have to adapt to improvise, and that would take time. Time was the one thing Marin had been studying how to buy. She moved. Not away laterally along the corridor wall, staying inside the matron's reach where the secondary limbs had less leverage. Counterintuitive. Insane, actually. Every survival instinct says to create distance from a predator, but the Shrike Matron's secondary limbs generated maximum force at full extension. Up close, in the gap between the forelimbs and the thorax, the geometry worked against the animal. Marin had calculated the safe zone, if you could call any zone within arm's reach of a Shrike Matron safe, and she lived in it. She retrieved her knife. The matron struck again, a downward blow from the secondary left forelimb that cratered the rock where Marin had been half a second before. She read the tell, moved, and struck again. Same target philosophy, not the armor, not the limbs, the joints, the gaps, the small, hidden vulnerabilities that nobody had bothered to look for because nobody had ever been crazy enough to get this close and live long enough to try. It went on for 3 minutes and 47 seconds. We know this from the scanner's timestamp logs. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of the most violent, desperate, technically precise close-quarters combat that has probably ever occurred between a human and any other species. The matron struck 11 more times. Marin dodged 9, partially blocked 1, and took one glancing hit to her right shoulder that dislocated it. She told us she popped it back in by slamming it against the rock wall. She told us this like she was describing a minor inconvenience, like bumping her elbow on a door frame. She scored 4 more significant strikes with the knife, 2 to joint gaps, 1 to a sensory cluster on the underside of the jaw, and 1, the killing blow, to the ventral thorax where the overlapping plates parted during respiratory expansion. She'd noticed it in the footage. When a Shrike Matron exerted itself heavily, its respiratory rate increased, and during peak inhalation, the ventral plates separated by nearly 8 centimeters. For about 1/5 of a second, there was a direct path to the primary cardiovascular structure. 1/5 of a second, 8 centimeters, that's what she'd been waiting for. The knife went in, found the central vessel and severed it. The matron collapsed. Not immediately. It took another 40 seconds for blood loss to overcome the animal's redundant circulatory system. Marin told us she backed away to the corridor wall, sat down in the dust, and held her bleeding arm against her chest and counted the seconds until the thrashing stopped. Then she walked to the rock where we found her, sat down and drank her water. The aftermath was, I don't know the right word, seismic maybe, not the geological kind. The kind that ripples outward through everything you thought you knew and rearranges all of it. The GCA sent a forensic team, then a second forensic team because the first one's report was flagged as potentially fabricated by headquarters, then a military observation committee, then a xenobiological review board, then several reporters, then several more reporters, then the kind of people who don't tell you who they work for but carry credentials that make station chiefs nervous. They all wanted to see the body. They all wanted to interview Marin. They all wanted to understand how a small human woman with a utility knife did what entire military units could not. Marin cooperated with all of them, patiently, methodically, without embellishment. She walked them through the fight step by step, drew diagrams, explained the biomechanics, showed them her notebook full of months of analysis. She answered every question the same way she did everything else, quietly, precisely, completely. Josic was the one who had the hardest time with it, not because he was angry or jealous. I'd expected that, honestly. But what actually happened was worse in a way. He was ashamed. I found him in the mess hall the evening after the first forensic team left. He was sitting alone, staring at his untouched food, and when I sat down across from him, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on a caliph before. They're a proud species, martial culture. They build their entire identity around physical dominance and combat readiness. 19 years I've done this work, he said. 19 years carrying weapons and wearing armor and telling myself I was the thing standing between the researchers and the predators. And she walks out there with a knife and beats a Shrike Matron, not with strength, not with armor, not with anything I have or anything I am. She beat it with, he struggled for the word, patience, understanding. She studied it until she knew it better than it knew itself, and then she walked into a storm and killed it. He was quiet for a moment. We called her weak Torvund. We looked at her and saw small and soft and fragile, and we called her weak. And the whole time, she was the most dangerous thing on this planet. We just couldn't see it because it didn't look like what we expected danger to look like. I didn't have anything to say to that. He was right, and we both knew it. The galactic news cycle did what news cycles do. They sensationalized it. Human woman SLAYS apex predator with kitchen knife. That kind of thing. The headlines were loud and breathless and missed the point by a mile. Because the story wasn't about a woman killing a monster. That's the simple version, the action movie version, and it's wrong. The story was about preparation, about 6 months of silent, unglamorous, obsessive work that nobody noticed and nobody valued. It was about watching footage at 3 in the morning, about filling a notebook with calculations that your colleagues laughed at, about walking into the field day after day, learning the ground, mapping the vibrations, building an understanding so deep and so complete that when the moment came, your body knew what to do before your conscious mind could form the thought. The story was about a woman who heard, "You're too small, you're too weak, you don't belong here," and responded not with anger or defiance but with the most devastating counterargument possible: competence. Marin didn't shout, didn't protest, didn't try to prove anything. She just did the work, all of it, every single day. And when the test came, when the universe put her alone in a dust storm with the deadliest thing alive, she was ready. That's what scared the Caliph military observers who came to study her, not the kill itself, the preparation. Because the kill could be dismissed as luck, as a fluke, as a one-in-a-million confluence of favorable conditions. But the preparation couldn't be dismissed. The notebook couldn't be dismissed. The 6 months of systematic, purposeful study couldn't be dismissed. She hadn't gotten lucky. She'd made her own luck, one data point at a time. I talked to Marin the night before she left Varatka. She was being transferred, or promoted, or reassigned, or whatever term the GCA was using to describe. We need this person somewhere more important than a field station. We sat on the observation deck looking out at the amber dusk. Varatka is ugly by most standards: red dust, sparse vegetation, no surface water. But at sunset, when the light goes long and horizontal and turns everything into copper and gold, it has a kind of severe, honest beauty. Like the planet isn't trying to impress anyone. It just is what it is. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Go ahead." "Were you afraid, out there in the storm when you knew it was coming?" She thought about it, really thought about it the way she thought about everything, carefully, without rushing to fill the silence. "Yes," she said finally, "the whole time I was terrified." "You didn't seem terrified. When we found you, you were drinking water." "I was drinking water because my hands were shaking so badly I needed to do something with them. And because I was dehydrated from the adrenaline dump. And because, if I didn't focus on a simple physical action, I was going to start screaming and never stop." She looked at me. "Torvund, I want to be clear about something, because I think people are starting to build a story around this that isn't true. I'm not fearless. I'm not superhuman. I'm not some kind of warrior. I'm a conservation biologist who's 115 pounds and doesn't have claws or armor or any of the things that should matter in a fight with an apex predator." "Then how?" "Because humans don't fight fair. We never have. We're not built for it. We don't have the claws or the teeth or the mass. What we have is this." She tapped her temple. "The most aggressive pattern recognition system in the known galaxy, hooked up to a body that can learn any movement and improvise in real time. We can't outfight anything, but we can outthink everything." She paused. "The Shrike Matron is a perfect predator. Every part of its biology has been optimized for killing over millions of years of evolution. It's fast, it's strong, it's armored, it's intelligent. But it evolved on a world without sapient opposition. It never had to deal with something that studied it. That deconstructed its attack patterns and mapped its vulnerabilities and practiced countermoves 1,000 times before the fight even started." She smiled then, small, tired, with a hint of something sharp underneath. "That's the thing about humans. Every other species looks at a predator and sees something to fear. We look at a predator and see a puzzle to solve. And once we decide to solve it, really decide with everything we have, it's just a matter of time." I think about that conversation a lot, more than I probably should. I think about it when I see the GCA's new training materials, which now include a section on human-derived threat analysis methodology. I think about it when I hear Caliph officers grudgingly admitting that maybe size isn't the only variable that matters in a combat assessment. I think about it when young researchers of every species show up at field stations with notebooks and questions, and that particular look in their eyes that says I'm going to understand this thing better than it understands itself. And I think about it when people ask me about humans, which they do more often than you'd expect, because the Marin Callaway incident didn't just change how the galaxy sees Shrike Matrons. It changed how the galaxy sees us, all of us, but especially them. Those small, soft, fragile creatures from that unremarkable little world on the unfashionable edge of the spiral arm. They called her weak. They looked at her narrow wrists and her light bones and her quiet voice, and they measured her against every physical standard the galaxy values: strength, size, speed, natural weaponry, and found her wanting. They looked at everything she wasn't and never bothered to ask what she was. And what she was, what they all are, every single one of those terrifying, beautiful, impossible little primates, is the thing that every apex predator in the galaxy should have been afraid of from the very beginning. Not a fighter, a learner. The Shrike Matron had millions of years of evolution. Marin Callaway had 6 months and a notebook. It wasn't even close. They found the notebook in her quarters after she left. She'd forgotten it, or maybe she'd left it on purpose, I was never sure. Bevra wanted to archive it. Josic wanted to frame it. I made copies for both of them and kept the original. It sits on my desk now, back on the station, next to my cold coffee and my overdue reports. Battered cover, dog-eared pages, water stains and dust marks, and a coffee ring on the front that nobody can identify the species of origin for. Inside, in small, precise handwriting, is the most complete anatomical and behavioral analysis of the Shrike Matron ever produced by any researcher in any species. 17 attack patterns, 12 defensive postures, 9 structural vulnerabilities, recovery windows calculated to the 100th of a second. And on the last page, written in a hand that's slightly less steady than the rest, maybe written after the fight, maybe before, I'll never know, is a single sentence. Everything bleeds. That's it, 2 words. And somehow they contain more truth about humanity than every xenobiological paper, every diplomatic assessment, every military analysis that the galaxy has ever produced. Because that's what humans understand deep in their bones in a way that no other species quite grasps, not as cruelty, not as aggression, but as a fundamental recognition that nothing is invincible, nothing is unbeatable, nothing is beyond the reach of a mind that refuses to accept impossible as a valid category. Everything bleeds. And given enough time, enough study, and a good enough knife, a human will find out exactly where.